4 decades ago, while the rest of the world celebrated the swinging 60s, flower power, and free love, fear gripped Glasgow. It seemed that one man, one monster, had made this place, the Barrowland Ballroom, his hunting ground.
In the 1960s, Glasgow was a city on the brink.
The newspapers soon gave this killer a name, Bible John. The police mounted a huge investigation, but to no avail. And then, the murders stopped.
Once a bustling port in the 1800s, the city had been ravaged by years of war and economic decline.
All 3 women were killed after a night out dancing at Glasgow's Barrowland Ballroom. The killings were linked by detectives and came to be known as the Bible John murders.
By the 1950s and 60s, it had become a shell of its former self. Unemployment was widespread, and the effects were felt across the city, from the crumbling buildings to the broken lives of its residents. The streets were lined with slums, and many of Glasgow's residents lived in deplorable conditions, facing poor health care and an increasing rise in gang activity. The city was struggling, trying to hold on to its former prestige, but it was clear that change was needed. The economic hardship had taken a severe toll, and hope seemed distant for the people of Glasgow. Yet, despite this decline, a change was on the horizon. As the world around them changed, Glasgow began to transform. The youth, shaking off the strict repression of the wartime generation, embraced music, fashion, and new opportunities. The city, once marked by poverty and despair, now seemed to hold the promise of a better future. Changing times, the 1960s marked a period of profound change for Glasgow. As the city grappled with its decline, a new energy emerged, especially among the younger generation. This era was a time of rebellion and renewal, as Glasgow's youth sought to break free from the confines of the past. Music, fashion, and a sense of freedom became the driving forces of this cultural shift. The youth embraced the growing music scene, with rock and roll making its way into the hearts of Glaswegians. Dance halls sprang up across the city, becoming the heartbeat of the cultural revolution. For the first time in years, people began to look forward to the future with a sense of optimism. It was as though the city was waking up from a long, hard slumber. At the same time, the city council was making significant strides towards revitalizing the city. Large-scale infrastructure projects were underway, improving roads, housing, and public services. The old slums were slowly being replaced by new housing, and with each new development, hope for a brighter future began to take root in the hearts of the people. It was a time of transformation, as Glasgow began to shake off its past and step into a new era. Discovery on February 23, 1968, a shocking discovery would alter the course of Glasgow's history forever. A joiner on his way to work stumbled upon the lifeless body of a woman on Carmichael Lane. Initially, he misinformed the police, believing the body was that of a man, which led them to assume it was likely a vagrant who had died from exposure. This early mistake was just the beginning of a series of missteps that would plague the investigation. The first officers to arrive were 2 traffic policemen, unfamiliar with proper forensic procedures. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that 2 detectives arrived on the scene, securing what little evidence remained. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that this was no accidental death. The woman had been brutally murdered, with signs of strangulation, violent beatings, and sexual assault. Only a pair of brown high-heeled shoes and a used sanitary towel were found near the body, which would later be confirmed as belonging to the victim. The crime scene revealed little else, but a witness did come forward, claiming to have heard a woman screaming, "Let me go, let me go," in the early hours of the morning. Though the witness's account did not lead to an immediate breakthrough, it confirmed that the crime had occurred in the lane. It wasn't until later that evening that the victim was identified as 25-year-old Patricia Docker, a nurse and mother of a young son. Patricia had separated from her husband a year earlier and had been living with her parents. The discovery of her body would mark the beginning of a chilling series of events that would grip the city. The murder of Patricia Docker was just the beginning. Nearly a year and a half later, tragedy struck again. On August 16, 1969, the body of 32-year-old Jemima McDonald was discovered in an abandoned building on McKeith Street. Mimi, like Patricia, had been a regular at Glasgow's dance halls, and she too had left her children at home to enjoy a night out. Her body was found by her sister, Margaret, after several days of searching. Mimi had been strangled with her own stockings and beaten, a chilling reminder of Patricia's fate. However, Unlike Patricia, Mimi's handbag was found missing, further linking the cases. The similarities between the two murders were striking. Both victims had been out at dance halls, and both had been attacked and left for dead. The murder of Mimi McDonald would eventually lead to a police breakthrough. Witnesses came forward, and a description of the killer, a tall, slim man with red hair, began to emerge. Despite this, the investigation continued to stall. Then, just 2 months later, on October 31, 1969, another body was discovered. This time it was 29-year-old Helen Puttock, found just yards from her home after a night out at the Barrowland Ballroom. Helen, too, had been beaten, raped, and strangled. The similarities to the previous murders were undeniable. Once again, the victim had been out dancing and had been violently attacked by the same man. This was no coincidence. The killings were clearly linked, and police began to believe they were hunting a serial killer. The man, who would later become known as Bible John, was now a terrifying figure in Glasgow's nightlife scene. Each of his victims had been young women, fond of dancing, and each had been murdered in a similar manner. But despite an extensive investigation and thousands of interviews, the killer remained at large, his identity still unknown. The investigation, the hunt for the killer, now dubbed Bible John by the media, became one of the largest and most intensive investigations in Scottish history. Detectives quickly linked the murders of Patricia Docker, Jemima McDonald, and Helen Puttock, recognizing a disturbing pattern in the brutal nature of the killings. The killer had been targeting young women who frequented the popular dance halls of Glasgow, specifically the Barrowland Ballroom. As the body count grew, so did the urgency to catch the perpetrator. The police worked tirelessly, interviewing thousands of people, but the investigation was complicated by several false leads. In the early stages, witnesses and potential suspects were interviewed, but none of them led to a breakthrough. Despite canvassing the dance halls, including the Majestic and the Barrowland, and distributing photographs of the victims, the investigation stagnated. One of the key pieces of evidence came from Jean, the sister of Helen Puttock, who had spent time with Bible John in the taxi before her sister's murder. She provided a detailed description of the man, including his appearance: tall, slim, and with red hair. Her account of his mood swings, his frequent quoting of Bible verses, and his agitated demeanor during the taxi ride became crucial in building a profile of the killer. Despite these critical details, the police faced numerous challenges. There were discrepancies in witness accounts, and the press release of a composite sketch generated multiple tips, but no solid leads materialized. Over 1,000 men were questioned, but the killer was nowhere to be found. The police even resorted to undercover officers posing as dancers in nightclubs to try to catch the killer, but this too proved fruitless. As the investigation continued to stall, frustration mounted. With each passing year, the case grew colder, and the killer remained elusive. The police were left to wonder whether they would ever uncover the truth behind the terrifying series of murders that had gripped Glasgow. Theories and questions even decades later, the mystery of Bible John remains unsolved, and numerous theories continue to circulate. Some believe that the murders were the work of a single, sadistic killer, while others argue there may have been multiple individuals involved. The most prominent theory points to Peter Tobin, a convicted serial killer, due to similarities in the killings and his presence in Glasgow during the late 60s. However, no concrete evidence has ever linked him to the Bible John murders. Did the killer die, or is he still out there? The truth remains elusive.